Valheim is a survival game that just kind of came out of nowhere. It quietly appeared on the Steam store in early access, and players instantly fell in love with it. Based on the gameplay trailers and the overwhelmingly positive reviews, it was an easy sell for me. Besides Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which I haven't personally played yet but I heard it was good, I can't think of any major Viking games that received such good reviews. I'm Jay from Keyboard Gaming, and today I'll be going over the game Valheim and helping you decide whether or not the early access is worth it for you. What I'll say right now is that I absolutely love the game, but it might not be for everyone. Since the game was just released in early access, there's a lot that's subject to change. At the end of the video, I'll be very briefly going over the official roadmap so you can see a hint of what's coming in the future. Since Valheim is a survival game, one of the main focuses is exploring the world. In its current state, the game world of Valheim is pretty fun to explore. Even at launch, there are several different biomes that make the game world come alive. You have your typical plains biome where you'll spend most of the time, the dangerous black forest, a murky swamp, and a huge ocean. Scattered throughout the world are little remnants of past civilizations. Broken down buildings can be used for resources, or can be fixed up to make a temporary shelter. Sometimes these buildings contain chests with loot, which is always a welcome find. You can find ancient runes scattered around that contain the lore of the world, and sometimes they'll give you helpful tips on how to progress. Some things that you'll inevitably come across are the altars to powerful creatures, which you can use to summon the mythical bosses of Valheim. The Black Forest is home to many creatures such as grey dwarves and massive trolls, making it a deadly place to explore. It does contain many valuable resources though, almost forcing you to take the risk of going in. The ocean separates you from the many other islands of the game, but it's also inhabited by massive creatures such as krakens or sea serpents. Huge waves can occur when the weather picks up, which also poses a risk to any building near the shore. Even with the game's limited biomes, the world feels much more alive than many other survival games. It gives you the sense that you're one small person in the middle of a giant, living world, which makes you want to further explore its secrets. The terrain is able to be manipulated, which lets you flatten out areas for building, or dig down a few feet into the earth. You can't create underground bases or anything like that, but the ground is dynamic enough to give you a sense of control over it. As far as the world goes, I think Valheim has an amazing start. The world is more fleshed out than some fully released games, which makes me excited to see how the game will change in the future. One thing I absolutely love about Valheim is the graphic style. I've seen many users on Steam actually complaining about it, but it was intentionally made this way. It has a lower poly and lower resolution feel to it, while at the same time having impressive lighting and shadows. It simultaneously looks like a PS2 era game and a modern one, which is something that I personally haven't seen in a game before. Because of its older look, it brings back some nostalgia of playing games many years ago. It seems to me like the developers put less of an emphasis on making the game look good, but instead chose to focus on the actual game mechanics. The retro style works extremely well, and when I'm actually playing, I barely notice the pixelated textures. It's not really fair to the game to judge it simply by the look of the textures. It's obvious that a lot of hard work went into Valheim, and despite the older style, it still looks and plays like a modern game. The crafting system is somewhat similar to other games in the same genre. You place down a crafting table, which actually needs to be under a roof to be used. Then the crafting table generates an area around it where you can destroy and build, kind of like the tool cupboards in Rust. You can combine many different resources to create tools, weapons, and tons of other items. All the tools you can craft have durability, but you can fix them at the workbench without consuming any resources whatsoever. I find this to be amazingly convenient, and it makes the game less tedious. The workbench also allows you to upgrade the tools you currently have to make them more efficient. Each upgrade level takes more resources than the last, and in order to upgrade to other levels, you need to make mini upgrades to the workbench. I find that this is a good way of balancing progression without adding too many unnecessary extra items. When farming for resources, it doesn't take a lot of time to collect what you need, though you do spend a significant amount of time exploring for more resources. One thing I really like about Valheim is that you feel rewarded for upgrading your items. It can be a long and dangerous journey finding the items that you need, so you feel a good sense of accomplishment for everything you create. As far as the crafting goes, I really enjoy Valheim's fresh take on this incredibly overused mechanic. Although the building takes a little bit to get used to, it's honestly one of the best building mechanics that I've personally seen in a survival game. It's not as easy to build as it is in a game like Rust, but the building is actually much more versatile. There are just enough building parts to enable you to build just about anything you could imagine. The snapping is very precise, almost to the point where it can get frustrating to new players. You can clip building parts inside each other to create really diverse and creative structures, and what I've found is that it's not incredibly difficult to collect building materials. There's a lot of awesome things to do in Valheim, but I personally love the building the most. I've played a lot of survival games, and I usually prefer to spend my time upgrading my character and exploring, but in this game, I absolutely love building things. Every base or house you create really reflects the Viking time period, especially when you adorn your rooms with deer skins and trophies of slain enemies. One thing we learned the hard way was that if you have a campfire in a building, it fills up the room with smoke and starts to suffocate you. Valheim isn't big into realism, but I found that to be a pretty interesting mechanic. The act of collecting resources for building is very polished as well. After chopping a tree, it'll fall to the ground where you'll need to chop it into pieces. These falling trees can fall on your head or one of your buildings, which can result in an insta-death or a broken base. Those falling trees have insta-killed me more than once, so I always take extra caution when collecting wood. As you get better axes, you'll be able to unlock more types of wood. Each type of wood comes with their own sets of items, which means that progressing in the game also lets you build more advanced structures. This also gives you the ability to craft stronger ships, which hold more cargo and can transport you to islands quicker. Since the world is so huge, there is also the ability to create teleporters that you can pair together. You can instantly transport across the map with these, though you can't transport valuable items such as metals through them. With a world as massive as Valheim's, it's a huge plus that it was made easier to get around. I still enjoy making small outposts all over the map, so that I can restock up on resources and sleep through the night. Because the building is so much fun, it doesn't feel like a chore to me. I personally think that the building is one of Valheim's strongest parts, and I'm excited to see what improvements will be made in the future. A huge focus of the game is fighting monsters and slaying bosses, so the combat needs to be decent in order for it to be fun. Fortunately, the combat is actually quite good. There are only a few wonky hitboxes like with the spears, but besides that the combat feels pretty fluid. One thing I'm not a huge fan of is how quickly your stamina bar depletes in combat. You can get easily overwhelmed by a horde of enemies, or even a large fast enemy. It's not terribly hard, so I don't die that often, but when I do, it's almost always because I ran out of stamina. Scattered throughout the land are many different types of enemies, each posing different threats. They range from small little dwarves and lizards to massive trolls and sea serpents. The blocking and parrying system works very well, and again, it only really fails when your stamina is gone. Periodically, your base will be raided by an army of monsters, forcing you to defend your base. You're able to make defenses to place around, though I haven't used them enough to see their effectiveness. Hidden around the map are crypts, which contain undead creatures like skeletons or ghosts. These crypts hold important loot that'll let you progress further in the game, but can pose quite a risk to anyone caught off guard. One major feature of the game is the bosses, which are summoned by placing a certain item on their altar. You find these altars randomly around the world, and you need to figure out what item it takes to summon them. Bosses aren't terribly difficult in multiplayer, but I can imagine they'd be quite a threat in single player. After you take down a boss, it gives you the ability to gain a new super ability to aid you in combat or exploring. Even though the combat can be frustrating sometimes, it greatly improves when you've crafted upgraded weapons and armor. Overall, I find the combat to be very solid. A game about Vikings needs to have a good combat system, and I wasn't disappointed by it. Even though Valheim has an incredible single-player experience, I think it really shines with friends. I have several worlds that I play on with various people, and it hasn't gotten old to me yet. It's much more fun exploring and building with friends, And when everyone builds houses, it starts to look like a real Viking village. I'm not actually sure where the multiplayer features will go in the future, but I can see some incredible possibilities. There's currently a PvP feature, so I could imagine that a large group of players could almost treat it like a Rust server by separating into several warring factions. It would be awesome to see large-scale Viking battles both on land and sea, which is even possible in its current state. For people who aren't interested in PvP, there's plenty of peaceful things to do with your friends too. If all you cared about was creating a massive village, that's an option for you too. Valheim is a game that can cater to many different playstyles, and multiplayer improves upon this in every way. The devs weren't incredibly specific about the coming updates, but the roadmap shows at least 4 updates coming in the future. We do know that we can look forward to new biomes, new enemies, improvements to combat, new items, new building materials, and new bosses. The roadmap also listed some things such as multiplayer interactions, improvements to combat, more locations, more mechanics, and even a sandbox mode. It's been a while since I've enjoyed a game of this genre so much, so I'm incredibly excited to see what the future of Valheim holds. Overall, I think Valheim is definitely worth the early access. Shortly after release, the game hit 1 million downloads and it still keeps its overwhelmingly positive reviews. If the developers keep up their good work, the game has the potential to become one of the greatest survival games of all time. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Keyboard Gaming. Thanks for watching, we'll see you in the next video.